to introduce for the first keynote, we have the honor to have today here Larry Summers, who's President Emeritus of Harvard University, former Treasury Secretary in the US during the Clinton administration, and head of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Obama administration. So welcome to the T20 Summit. Larry Summers, it's a pleasure and an honor having you here.
Very glad to be with you, and only wish I could be with you in person.
This is the applause from the Bocconi University here, and for the conversation I leave to Professor Bruni, who's Vice President of ISPI and has been coordinating the task force of international finance at the T20.
Thank you for being with us, Professor Summers. It's a real honor. Let me put you a first question in very general in macro terms. Around the world, central banks and governments are strongly supporting expansionary policies. How and to what extent do you think this is sustainable?
I think there are important differences across countries, but I am increasingly concerned that we are moving into a period after many years when the dominant risks were deflation of inflation. What we know is that more expansionary monetary policy cannot alleviate supply bottlenecks, that it may even have limited efficacy in promoting demand starting from very low levels of interest rates. When you ease monetary policy starting from places like where we are, the effects may disproportionately flow into financial assets. The impacts on aggregate output when it is supply constrained may be limited, and the results may be inflationary. I think the golden age of central banking may be coming to a conclusion, and that fiscal policy may again become a dominant instrument of stabilization policy. That would be an important change from thinking that many of us have had, and T20 would need to take cognizance of it. I think your recommendations, if I understood them, were prescient. I suspect that for a variety of reasons, it may be necessary to have and appropriate to have somewhat higher levels of interest rates in the future than we have in the recent past. And if that is so, it is likely to complicate the macroeconomic management situation in emerging markets. To the extent that that is true, we are likely to need to manage more complex debt situations than has been the case in the future. There are some in the progressive world who put overwhelming emphasis on debt restructurings, debt reductions, and the like. And there certainly is a need for frameworks in which those can take place. There are important inadequacies, current frameworks with respect to loans that go to state enterprises or the private sector, with respect to the role of China and issues of comparability. But it is also important to recognize that the world is going to need very large flows of new credit if it's going to deal with challenges like climate change. And whatever architecture we put in place for dealing with debt overhangs also needs to recognize the desirability of new lending and needs to be structured in a way that will enable and support new lending when that is appropriate.
Thank you. I have another question, much more to the point of the G20 action. there's been a new allocation of IMF special drawing rights, has been enacted and welcomed by the G20. But what is left, according to you, to support a sustainable recovery and avoid new financial crises and problems with developing countries?
Look, I think the SDR is a welcome step. I hope there will be some success in reallocating SDRs, though I think that will be a complex and lengthy process. One of the real opportunities at the G20, it seems to me, is to give impetus to far-reaching reform and growth of the international financial institutions, particularly the IMF and the development banks. The reality is that their levels of lending have not been adequately adjusted to the increases in their capacity, reflected by low interest rates. The truth is that they are not playing as large a role as they could with respect to issues of climate change or issues of pandemic threat. I believe that right now, the main challenges to security, not the only challenges to security, but the most important challenges to security for my children and when I have them, my grandchildren's generation, come from global threats, the prevention of which is a global public good. Issues like climate change and issues like biodiversity, issues like particularly pandemic threats, issues like terror emerging from fragile states. And the central institution for defense against those threats is the development institutions. And so I believe this is the appropriate time for far-reaching change in those institutions. That is not going to come from deputies reporting up through a chain after extensive consultation with the managers of those institutions. That is only going to come with a strong political impetus. My hope is that my good friend, someone I enormously admire, your Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, will issue a second whatever it takes declaration with respect to financing needed to finish the job with respect to COVID and be ready with respect to future pandemics, and that the international institutions will be an important tool in that regard.
Thank you, Professor Summers. We join you in your hopes.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was a pleasure having you, and thanks also for this message.